many people who in this room who are happily married carefully check their spouse's birth certificate and so on? My guess is that our methods are not so uncommon as they appear.
Yeah, I'll think about that. I mean, I spent a lifetime, looking at businesses and why some work and why some don't work. As Yogi Berra said, you can see a lot just by observing, and that's pretty much what Charlie and I have been doing for a long time. And I mentioned pattern recognition earlier. And I would say it's important to recognize what you can't do. So we may have tried the department store business and a few things, but we've generally tried to only swing at things in the strike zone, and our particular strike zone. And it really hasn't been much more complicated than that. You don't need the IQ in the investment business that you need in certain activities in life. But you do have to have emotional control. I mean, we see very smart people do very stupid things, and it's fascinating how humans do that. Just take the people that get very rich and then leverage themselves up in some way that they lose everything. I mean, that they are risking something that's important to them for something that isn't important to them. Well, you can say you could figure that one out in first grade, but people do it time after time. And you see that constantly, self-destructive behavior of one sort or another. I think we've probably, and it doesn't take a genius to do it, but I think we've sort of avoided the self-destructive behavior. Charlie?
Well, there's just a few simple tricks that work well, and particularly if you've got a temperament that has a combination of patience and opportunism in it. And I think that's largely inherited, although I suppose it can be learned to some extent. Then I think there's another factor that accounts for the fact that Berkshire's done as well as it has, is that we're really trying to behave well. And I had a great-grandfather, when he died, the preacher gave the talk, and he said, none envied this man's success so fairly won and wisely used. Now, that's a very simple idea, but it's exactly what Berkshire's trying to do. There are a lot of people who make a lot of money, and everybody hates them, and they don't admire the way they earn the money. And I'm not particularly admirable at making money running gambling casinos. And we don't own any. And we've turned down businesses, including a big tobacco business. So I don't think Berkshire would work as well if it were just terribly shrewd, but didn't have a little bit of what the preacher said about my grandfather Ingham. We want to have people think of us as having won fairly and used wisely. It works.
And we were very, very lucky to be born when we were and where we were.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could have dropped us at some other place in time or some other part of the world, and things would have turned out.
And think of how lucky you were to have your Uncle Fred. Warren had an uncle who was one of the finest men I ever knew. I used to work for him too. A lot of people have terrible relatives.
That's not an unimportant point. Just yesterday, we had a meeting of all my cousins and a whole bunch that we just get together at annual meeting time. There are probably 40 of us or 50 of us there, and they were pulling out some old pictures, and I had 4 aunts. They were all in these pictures, and every one of them, I mean, you were so lucky if you had one like that, and I had 4. I mean, they just were, in every way, they reinforced a lot of things that needed some reinforcement in my case.
I wish you'd had a couple more.
But
we'd be doing even better.
But he mentioned my Uncle Fred, but my Aunt Katie worked in the store too. My Aunt Alice worked in the store. And you just couldn't have been around better people. I think Charlie would agree with that.
Yeah, well, we were very lucky.
Yeah. My grandfather was a little tough, however. Tell him what my grandfather used to do when he paid you on Saturday, Charlie.
Well, that was very interesting. Warren's a Democrat, but he came from different antecedents. I worked for his grandfather, Ernest, and he was earnest. And when they passed Social Security, which he disapproved of because he thought it reduced self-reliance, and he paid me $2 for 10 hours work. There was no minimum wage in those days on Saturday, and it was a hard 10 hours. At the end of the 10 hours, I came in, and he made me give him 2 pennies, which was my contribution to Social Security. And he gave me 2 $1 bills and a long lecture about the evils of Democrats and the welfare state and the lack of self-reliance, and it went on and on and on and on. So I had the right antecedents, too. I had Ernest Buffett telling me what to do.
Okay, enough family history.
I haven't overstated that, have I?
No, you haven't overstated it at all. No.
You can't believe it, people. And he thought he was doing his duty by the world to do that.
But we were lucky, Dad. The people we were around when we were young, we were very lucky. Negotiations that drag out have a tendency, they're more likely to blow up for some reason. I mean, people, they can get obstinate about very small points, and it's silly to be obstinate, but people get silly sometimes. So I like to keep things moving. I like to show a certain amount of trust in the other person, because usually trust comes back to you. But the truth is, there's some bad apples out there, and spotting them is not going to come from looking at documents. You really have to size up whether that person who's getting a lot of cash from you how they're going to behave in the future, because we're counting on them, and that assessment is as important as anything involved. We know all the figures and everything going in, and we know what we'll pay, and so we don't want things to get gummed up in negotiations. And I'm perfectly willing to lose small points here and then on a deal if I have the deal on the right terms. I don't believe in making and Tom Murphy taught me this. I mean, you just don't try and win every point. It's a terrible mistake. But you make a decent deal, and if you find something that bends a little different some way, that's okay. If you think it's bad faith and gives an indication of the character of the person you're dealing with, then you got another problem, and you're lucky if you find that out early. And not everybody's wired the same way. Now, if you come into this world wired with an IQ of 85 or something of the sort, or disabled or whatever it may be, you are not going to do as well in a market economy remotely as well as we do. But you still provide much of what makes Charlie and I very rich. And when it comes to fighting in Iraq or something of the sort, that becomes an equal opportunity type thing. But when it comes to making a lot of money, it's not equal opportunity in this country. So I believe that a rich country like ours should not give lower benefits than what takes place now. And I certainly don't think that we've got all kinds of mechanisms for saving that are extremely good. We have 401ks in this country. We have taxes on dividends and capital gains at 15%. So the money I earn gets taxed at a lower rate than the money that a receptionist in our office may earn. And I would not be doing so well if I were stuck over in Bangladesh or someplace. So this society is providing huge benefits to me that other societies would not. And I think that the obligation for the people who do well in this society is to provide a reasonable level of sustenance for those beyond their productive years. We've got the capability to do it. Right now we quit taxing for Social Security at $90,000. But and that means that everybody in my office is paying, or most of them are paying 12.2 or 12.4%, counting what the company contributes, toward this. People talk about double taxation of dividends. They're getting taxed for Social Security, and they're getting taxed for income on their income, and they're paying a higher rate or an equal rate overall in many cases to the same rate compared to the rate that I pay. And I think that's sort of nonsense in the society. So I don't want to do anything that hurts the level of the bottom 20 or 30% in terms of their income. I see people living with fear about health care, or living with fear about running out of money in their old age. And I think a society should try to minimize the fear that their inhabitants experience. And that doesn't mean just fear of getting mugged or something. It means fear that the last 25 years of their life, they're not going to have much income. So I would, and the degree to which the administration or other people are worrying about the deficit in Social Security 25 years out, when they have a $500 billion deficit excluding the Social Security surplus now, I mean, it just strikes me as nonsense. Here we are deploring something that's going to happen in 20 years that's a fraction of what is happening right now, while they're cheering, basically, and talking about further favoritism in the tax law. So I have great trouble with people that say, that the system can't sustain. Right now, 4.5% of our GDP goes to Social Security. 50 years from now, 6%, 6.5%. Well, believe me, our GDP will be far larger 50 years from now, and going from 4% to 6% does not strike me as a terrible prospect. If you ask me what I would do to change it now, I would means test it. I would lift the $90,000 way up. In fact, I might apply it, on all income. Then you'd really get people's attention. But I would gradually, and we're in the process of doing this, but I would certainly increase the retirement age. I mean, the world in 2005 is much different than the world in 1937 in terms of longevity prospects and the ability to function productively. Charlie, what do you say?
Well, that's the view from Berkshire's Democratic chairman. And the odd part of Berkshire on this issue is that the right-wing Republican who is speaking feels more strongly than Warren that the Republicans are out of their cotton-picking minds to be taking on this issue right now. I do not, if the country is going to get richer at 1 or 2% per annum for a long time ahead, and it's going to have more old people who are living longer and spending money on medical care, the idea that eventually a higher share of GDP would be going through Social Security to retirees and so on, that we now have is not anathema to me. It's an exactly logical way to be spending money under different circumstances. And if the government runs out a little short of money as it gets more Social Security obligations, I see nothing wrong with having some consumption taxes or whatever to pay in a reasonable way for what is a very reasonable expenditure. Social Security is very successful. Apart from the disability element, which is relatively small, there's practically no fraud. It's hard to fake being dead. And furthermore, it's a reward for work. All kinds of people are working in this country because they want to eventually qualify for Social Security. Just as many people are doing dangerous military service because they want the pension that will come eventually. So Social Security is a very capitalistic institution with profoundly good effects. It's one of the most successful things the government has ever done in terms of efficiency and good effects. And in a Republican administration that may shortly have to do something really unpleasant, like face down North Korea or Iran over atom bombs, is wasting its goodwill over some twaddle that a bunch of economists that haven't thought it through properly devoutly believe. It's a very sad occurrence.